Hi, everybody. It's so good to have you here. It's great to see the turnout. My name is Julie Kiefer. I am Director of Research Communications here at University of Utah Health. And today I'll be giving you some tips and tools to perform well in media interviews. And, I can imagine for a lot of you, and it's true for me, that the idea of talking to the media can sound a little bit intimidating. You might have visions in your head. Oop, oh dear. Of it looking something like this, which is a little bit scary. But in reality, most of the time, it's somewhere along the lines of this, maybe somewhere in between. But most media, I would say 98, 99% of the media are there to help you tell your story. They want you to do well. They chose to talk to you because they thought that what you had to say would be of interest to their audience. And so they want to make sure that you do the best job possible. And so I think I want you to think of talking to the media as a great opportunity. I mean, how often do you have the chance to stand on your soapbox in front of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people or more? Social media might be the other place. We're not going to talk about social media today. We're talking about traditional media. But traditional media has the advantage that they have a lot of loyal followers, that they have skilled people who can help you tell your story. There are a lot of good reasons to interact with the media, and we'll go through some of those today. So in this presentation, I don't know why the forward, let's try this. Nope. We're going to go from why to whew. So in between there, we're going to understand the media and their mindset, talk about why you might want to talk to the media, how to perform like a pro, and ace those questions. Before we start, I want to promote the next workshop that's happening in this four-part series. Kyle, if you want to put the link in the chat, that would be great. Kyle Wheeler is actually gonna give this next presentation in about a month on about giving a great presentation. So don't miss that. It'll be very good information. This workshop today is actually the third in the series. It started with honing your elevator pitch. That was given by Sophia Friesen. The recording of that workshop is now available online if you click on that link. The second workshop was promoting your research through social media, and that was an excellent one done too, moderated by Andrea Gallegos. And again, click on that click so that you can find that recording. Great information, and we hope that all of you will take advantage of the expertise from this group. I also wanted to point you to another online series that I actually found really helpful and well done. And Kyle, if you can put that link in the chat as well, that'd be great. This is actually, it's called Talking Science, an Introduction to Science Communication. There are 10 videos in all. Pretty engaging. This individual works for the BBC and other media outlets in the UK. So there's a lot of great information here. So it's another resource for you to dive into if you want to look into it more. All right, so let's get started. In the first half of this talk, we're just going to spend a lot of time understanding the media. What are they looking for, and why would you want to engage with them? And so what we're going to start with is looking at an article that was published about research last year. This isn't the whole article, it's just an excerpt published by NBC News National covering research on marijuana use during pregnancy. So I'm just going to go through kind of the first, couple lines here so you can just hear what this is about. But what I want you to be thinking about is why would the researcher want to get this information out to the media? So I'm going to ask you to answer that question in just a moment. So let's go through this. Marijuana use during pregnancy linked to low birth weight, study finds. People who use marijuana during pregnancy may be putting their baby's health at risk, with risk increasing as age goes up, a new study suggests. And then it goes into some more specifics about specific findings from the research, and then a nice quote from Dr. Tori Metz, who's an OBGYN researcher here at the U. So I'm going to pose this question to you now, and I actually cannot see the chat at all. How do you do that? in this mode. So you can either raise your hand or speak out. That would actually be the easiest, or put in the chat, why would Dr. Metz want to get this information out to the media? And does Sophia or Christine, do you have tips? Can I see the chat when I'm in presenter view at all? Or do I have to exit out to see the chat? Okay.
Sorry, had to
Kyle?
unmute. I
Okay.
think that
Oh,
there might be a way, but we'd have to exit out, I
oh,
think.
I see it. No. I see it now.
You
Got
got
it.
it. Okay.
Okay. To notify the public of potential risks. Yes. And there are many, many right answers. So please just pour them in. Accessible information in an efficient manner. Yeah, that's how it's presented. Absolutely. Very important. Educating mothers to increase chance of healthy babies being born. Yes. Public health message, basically. Promoting public awareness. Yes. Yes, all good answers. A lot of people think marijuana is safe to use during pregnancy. Yes, absolutely. So all good answers. And so one thing I want you to think about is that when you're talking to the media, you should have a particular goal in mind. In this particular case, I think a lot of the reason was to give good public health advice, right? Many women not many, but some women use marijuana to control nausea during pregnancy. But now we're learning that this may not be a good idea. In fact, it's probably not. And so getting that information out to help with the health of these individuals. So here are some other reasons why you might want to talk to the media. Raising awareness, educating the general public about this thing that you want to talk about, to clarify misconceptions or misinformation, and build trust. So, using marijuana to control nausea during pregnancy, that might be a misconception that you want to address here. A totally valid reason is to grow your reputation and establish your expertise. I can tell you that Dr. Tori Metz is very popular with the media. A lot of her research has made it into national press, and now the national press know to go to her when they want to find an expert who can talk about risks during pregnancy. And so that's a good position to be in, right? Another reason might be to, if you have a call to action, that's what CTA is. Maybe you want someone to enroll in a clinical trial or attend an event or get a vaccination. That could be a great reason to talk to the media. To demonstrate the value of research. I think this is something that we're all thinking about during these times. It is beneficial to all of us to demonstrate why research is important and how it's helping people in their real lives. And to humanize science and scientists, make that connection, show that these are real people, these are your friends, these are your neighbors, these are American citizens who are doing this research for reasons, for good reasons. And so when you are thinking about talking to the media, part of your job is to figure out what is that goal for you. And there should be one goal that rises to the top. That's up to you to figure out, because then you're going to tailor your messaging around that goal. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Another goal could be advocacy. And so I wanted to take a moment to talk about this for a little bit, just because of the times that we're in. If we here at the university are helping you to get into the media, we are doing that because of your expertise in your subject area. And in that role, it's your job to provide, facts related to whatever it is that you're talking about. But you might have other reasons that you might want to talk to the media. If you want to provide an opinion about a policy, if you want to talk about how specific policies are affecting your work or the work of people around you, That is something that you have the academic freedom to do, and Kyle can paste some information into the chat. But one thing to understand is that here at the University of Utah, and this is true for, I would say most, if not all, public universities, we are funded by the state. And as part of that, it's a mandate that the university remains neutral on policy positions. And so in your official capacity, you may not provide opinion, but you have the academic freedom to do so. And so what that means is that when you provide opinion about policy, or if you are expressly trying to reach out to the media to provide opinion, then you're doing that on your own personal time. And so that means, not during the workday, not using university resources. When you talk to the media in that capacity, you can say that you're a staff member, a professor, a student, whatever you are, but then you need to say, I'm speaking on my own behalf and not on behalf of the university, just to make that crystal clear. And so I'll show you an example of that here. So Dr. Shepard is a professor in neurobiology. He published this piece just not that long ago, last week, Why We Still Need Animal Research in a World of AI and Organoids. Great information in there, but this is in direct reaction to a policy change in the NIH. And there's great information, there's also opinion. And so, what he clarified at the end of this this piece is, he provided his name, where he works, his title, but then said the views represented in this piece are his own personal views and should not be taken to represent the University of Utah. And then the publication GEN must have added that last part. So this is kind of what that can look like, either in written form or even, if you're giving an oral interview. Those are the types of things you need to specify. So if you have questions about that, let's save them for later, but I'd be happy to talk about that more. And if you're not sure, just reach out to your press officer. You can always reach out to me or Sophia, even if you're not we're in the health sciences side of campus. Even if you're not, we can either direct you to the right person or answer those questions anyway. Okay, so you might have a particular goal in mind for talking to the media, but really you need to understand what the media want, because they're not going to put you on the air or talk to you unless what you have to say meets their needs. And so what I'm showing you here is 4 different headlines that have come out within the last 6 months or so. And we're going to talk through, what is the newsworthy element of some of these stories. So I'll just go ahead and read these out loud. More measles cases identified in Utah, including first in a child. Very sad. Does air pollution raise the risk of brain bleeds over time? Also kind of sad. Researchers genetically altered fruit flies to crave cocaine. A University of Utah doctor's research led to a major HIV drug. He worries federal cuts will stop people from getting it. So I want you to either speak up or put in the chat, what are some of you don't have to attribute it to each headline, but what are some of the newsworthy elements here? Like, why do the press want to do these stories? Why are they interested in getting this information out to their audience? Oh, there must be some ideas out there. Timely, yes, yes, yes. So timeliness is probably the most important element when you're talking about the news. That's what news is. What is happening now? Why do people need to know this information today? Very, very important. Fruit flies craving cocaine sounds goofy. Yeah, it's goofy and it's kind of crazy and it's kind of cool. So all of those things, it's things that are surprising, things that make you say, huh, things that make you wonder, or, really trigger that curiosity. That's something that media also love. Affecting children, yes, things that are relevant to us and people we know. Authors want clicks, yes. Sorry, that went by quick. Connect science to our local environment so folks ask themselves if they should behave differently. Yes, so if we're talking about the air pollution headline. I mean, this is a very important topic here along the Wasatch Front in Utah. So anytime there's an air pollution story, we know it's going to get picked up. We could say the same for measles right now, right? This is something that's on everyone's minds. It's a trending topic. Those stories are going to be very are needed right now. Local relevance, yes, absolutely. Politics affecting health, yes. Hotly debated topics. Yes. Hot topics. Yes. Controversy. Media love controversy. We don't always love controversy, but the media do. So if you are going to talk on a controversial topic, you might want to talk to your press office first to get some guidance around that. So yeah, what we're looking at here then are these elements of timeliness, trending topics, being relevant, relatable. So, things that a lot of people experience, something related to sleep, weight gain, flu, heart disease, cancer, common pregnancy, common health conditions, things that we encounter in our every day. Something new and surprising about that is often newsworthy. Local, very important for our local news, things that are topics that are important to Utah and Utahns. Sorry, I can't see everything here. Address controversy, cool or surprising. Yeah, so we've talked about all of these things. And so, I'm not going to talk so much about how to get picked up by the media, except to say that, for example, if you have timely research that is just about to publish, your press office can consider writing a press release about that if we think that it's a newsworthy topic. There's also the media pitch. If you think that there's a story or an event that would be of interest to the media, we can help you to do that, get that in front of the media. Or if you have expertise around a trending topic, if you're an infectious disease expert who can talk about the measles, we'll get you on the air. Press release, media pitch, or the media might seek you out, right? If they are interested, if they know that they want to do a story about air quality, air pollution, they might just do a Google search to see who they can find at the University of Utah or anywhere and call you directly. If they do that, we hope that you will engage your press officers. But there are things to consider in any case, like if you have gotten this far where you have media interest, there's still more to think about. And that is to understand where the media are coming from. And the first thing to understand is that they are not your PR team. So you may have a story that you want to tell, but they need to think about what their audience is interested in and what's going to be important to them. So that's where the newsworthy stories come in. But I'll tell you another example. Often we get requests, for example, like, oh, the general public should really know about the Utah electrode array, which was, invented 25 years ago. And, that's a really great invention that Utahns should know about. Well, that was 25 years ago. So, it's really hard to get old information into the news. But if you can put a timely news peg onto that, oh, this Utah electrode array is a part of this device, which is helping people now. And here's some research that just published demonstrating that. Then that puts it in a framework that might be appealing to media. So you have to think the way they think. And figure out how your story might play into their framework. Another thing to know about reporters is that a lot of them are generalists, meaning they might be covering, a car crash, a bill that published in the legislature and this scientific breakthrough. And so what that might mean is that they don't have specific knowledge about your topic of interest. You need to explain that to them. Like they need to understand why this thing you want to talk about matters. You need to be explicit. It's not enough to say, hey, there was this great thing that happened. You have to then connect the dots for them to help them understand why their audience would care. And And be aware that media often work under tight deadlines. And this is something we, as people in media relations, often struggle with, is that scientists in particular are very deliberate and they have their week scheduled to the minute. And it's like, well, okay, the media want to talk to me, I'll get to it next week. Well, that's probably not going to work because deadlines are often very rapid. Local media in particular, they have their daily story that they need to file. And so, our policy in our office is if we get a media request, we should reply within the hour. I can't necessarily expect all of you to do that, but just be cognizant that you may need to do an interview in that same day. And so that might mean rearranging your schedule to accommodate their needs. And so, if it's important enough to you to get your message out into this, thousands, tens of thousands of people, then you might be inconvenienced a little bit to make that happen. So just be aware of that. Another thing is also know that journalists have editorial independence. So what that means is they may or may not be willing to give you their questions ahead of time. And don't be surprised if they don't. That's kind of their prerogative. What they should be able to do is tell you the purpose of the story. Like, what is the story? What is the story they're trying to tell? If this is a situation where they've come to you as an expert rather than the other way around. The other thing to know is that you will not have the chance to review the story before it goes out. Very rarely does that happen. And that's their job as a journalist, is to get the facts right. They do that during the interview with you to the best of their ability. And then they might have their own framing for the story that might differ from yours. And, they have the right to do that. And so, don't necessarily expect that you'll have that chance to review the article. Sometimes they will send quotes over, quotes that you've given to make sure that that's what you said, but rarely an in-depth review. Okay, so you've made your media pitch, you have your media interest, and now they want to do that interview. And so there's a lot that you need to ask them so that you can prepare in the best way. And one piece of information is, what kind of media is this? Is it print? Is it radio? Is it audio? Or something else? Sorry, radio or video or something else. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail into how you might prepare differently for each. We could talk about that later if you want more information. I think what I'll say now is that for print, in some ways that's the least stressful of the three, just because, if you're being interviewed, either on the phone or on Zoom, you could probably have your notes in front of you. So you have those to refer to. They're in the print medium, they're not going to be quoting your entire interview, they'll be pulling out quotes. And so, that's just a little less pressure on you. Radio, of course you have to be careful about the ums and the ahs. Something else to think about is that even though people can't see you, they can still kind of hear the expression on your face. So if this is something that you're excited and happy about, then actually show that expression, and that's going to come through in that audio interview. Have a drink of water before doing your radio interview, things like that. Video, I think it stands to reason that appearance matters, and that's just the way it is. And so dress like you would as if you were giving a lecture, maybe a button-down shirt, a nice blouse. Suit and ties are rarely necessary. You could wear a white coat if you're talking as a clinician. And, just be careful not to fidget, move around in your chair. You can do some hand gestures, but just don't go crazy to the extent that it's going to be distracting. And also just be mindful of what you're wearing. No huge busy patterns. Stripes are usually don't do well on video. Things like that. You want to know what their deadline is. Do they need to talk to you today, or could they talk to you next week? Sometimes they are further out. Is this going to be a live interview or recorded? If it's recorded, then you can ask to, redo to answer a question a second time if you weren't happy how it came out, your answer came out the first time. But live, you're kind of on the spot, and you need to be prepared, and we'll talk about that next. If a publication has reached out to you, then if it's not one that you've heard of, then I would do a little legwork, or have your press office do a little legwork to figure out who they are. There are some pretty dicey publications out there, and you may not want to be affiliated with them. So, do your homework there. Similarly, if you're not familiar with a particular reporter, it's really helpful to look at what types of stories they've done, related, in your genre, science or health, in the past, just to understand, where they might be coming from, what types of questions they might be asking. That could be really helpful. And like I mentioned, even if they won't share their questions with you ahead of time, you should definitely learn why are you doing this story? If it's not something that you pitch to them, if they're coming to you, what's your angle? What are you hoping to understand? At least having that general information will help you to prepare. All right. And it looks like Amy Hawkins has some useful advice. If it's recorded and you feel like you flubbed up, don't be afraid to ask. Yeah, ask for a redo. Absolutely. Yeah, and they want to help you. They want it to be a good story too. No problem, Amy. Great minds, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the interview itself and how to prepare for that. So unfortunately, I've embedded a video clip. It's not playing, so I'm going to exit out of presentation mode, go to YouTube, and play the clip, and then we'll talk about it. So bear with me for a second here. All right, so we're going to watch about around a little less than 2 minutes of this interview. And I want you to tell me afterwards, what did she do well? And was there anything that you didn't like? So there's going to be a little preamble before we get to the interview itself. So hang on. Then this is with Dr. Celine Gounder.
Last month, the FDA approved a drug called lenacapavir. Someone more fluent than me will say it again very soon. Also known as Yes2Go. It's a twice-yearly injection that has shown nearly 100% efficacy in preventing HIV infection in clinical trials, and it's being called the closest we've come to an HIV vaccine. CBS News medical contributor Dr. Celine Gounder joins us now with more. She's editor-at-large for public health at KFF Health News. Dr. Gounder, good morning. Say it better than me. How do we pronounce this?
So the big breakthrough with lenacapavir, also known by the brand name Yes2Go, is convenience and adherence. So until now, people have had to take a daily pill to prevent HIV infection. Now we're talking about 2 injections a year. So this is an especially big deal for people who've had difficulty accessing preventive medications until now, specifically people of color and women. So around half of new HIV infections among women in the United States are among Black women. And at best, 10% of high-risk Black women are on preventive medications. So this will make it a lot easier for many more women to be on these meds. I asked sexual health educator Goody Howard what this approval means to women like her.
All right, so we're going to pause it there. I'm going to exit out. So I want you to tell me, shout it out, or put it in the chat. What did you like about that? Or what did you not like? Great hand gestures. Yeah, I noticed that too. Enthusiastic, yes. Personable, yep. Anything else? Eye contact. Yeah, pacing. Clear, concise message. Yep. Right to the point. She could be more brief. I agree. She focused on what she wanted to get across when answering the question of pronunciation. Yeah. No ums or ahs. I know. I wish I could do that. Like that she took charge of the topic at the beginning. Yeah, she was very confident. She knew what she wanted to say. So, looked at her notes a lot. Yeah, and that surprised me too. I noticed that too. But actually, she did it in a way that wasn't too distracting, I think. So she did a good job with that. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. Some people think it's distracting. But I can see, I guess I was actually surprised that she could use notes in that situation. But I guess if that kind of shows that if you can nail it without notes, it makes it even more effective. But there's pros and cons, right? You don't want to miss any points you want to make. Okay, I'm going to go back to presenter view here. Hang on. Oops. Actually, hang on. I just want to change one thing for future sharing. Okay, got it. Okay. Okay. I think another thing I noticed is when the host kind of stumbled over Lena Kappa beer, she she didn't laugh there was a chuckle, but I think she was laughing with him, not at him. So had that respectful back and forth, animated, engaging, memorable. So I think these first 4 points here, which a lot of you also mentioned in some different way in your answers, were that sometimes it's not like how you say something can be just as important as what you say. So, if something's exciting, like I was saying with the radio interviews, if something's exciting, then they should hear that in your voice. If something is really concerning, then you want to express that, right? And people will pick up on that emotion. So, getting that emotion across can really set the tone and help people get that deeper understanding of what you're trying to say. Succinct answers. Yeah, I loved how she started out by saying that, to see if I remember, it wasn't memorable, that the drug was, oh no, I forgot. It was accessible, I think, and now I forgot. Shoot. If someone can help me, that'd be great. She made 2 points. And while listening to it, that really caught my attention, right? It had these 2 features that made this drug stand out apart from the rest. And she got those out right away. And so when you're giving those answers, having that succinct clarity can really make a difference. So, keep your answers to say 15, 20 seconds at the most. And, brief can be better because if people have to wade through a bunch of words to figure out what you're trying to say, then it distracts from that message. Keep it accessible, no jargon. She spoke in very plain language, which I think was great. And use analogies, give examples, tell stories. So the first thing I'll say is I'm not going to spend a lot of time here talking about communicating science in an accessible way. Mostly that, here are some of the basics, and this is something to work on. I would recommend that you watch Sophia's workshop for honing your elevator pitch. And there they spend a lot of time, giving really good explanations of, how to do it well. Great examples there. So I would refer you to that to really get a more in-depth point of view on that. Also, the series from the BBC fellow, he has one of his videos focuses on that as well. So that's where you can find some more information. But with this last point, what I want to get across is that, you can provide information, but if you can help people really understand the context, really visualize, what this means, either with a personal story or the story of someone else, or by giving a specific example of, why this is useful. So, the Celine, Dr. Gounder talked about specific populations that could really benefit from this drug. That really helps you understand, the significance of this finding, or tell stories. So I'm going to play another clip. And again, I'm going to exit out to find it. But with this clip, what I want you to hear is how the person who's being interviewed gets her point across. What are the examples, what analogies she gave to make her point, and how did that work for you, and why did it work? So before I play that, I'll just say Science Friday is a great place to hear science communication done well. Those are long form interviews, so it's different than your typical newscast, but they vet their interviewees ahead of time. They prep them, do a practice run before they do the live show, and so what comes out at the end is usually pretty polished and engaging. So a great place to kind of listen and learn how you might be able to incorporate some of those skills into your own narrative. So let's listen to this clip. All right, here we go. And this is, how long is this? Oh, I can't tell. I think it's about 30 seconds. Hang on.
Talk about that. How significant are, for example, when I use ChatGPT or any of those things, that we don't notice it, but it costs energy to do that.
Absolutely.
Right?
So we looked at open source models. So ChatGPT, like I said, those tend to be very secretive. But for open source models, doing something like asking for recipe advice or, a few jokes, it might not be very energy intensive at all. Based on our calculations and our work with researchers, it might be like running the microwave for 1/10 of a second or something really small.
Yeah.
But there's a big range. So if you're generating an image using an AI model, it might add up to 8 seconds in a microwave. If you're doing something like generating a 5-second video, it can be much, much more, running the microwave for maybe over an hour. So there's a big range. Yeah, absolutely.
Does it?
All right. So yeah, that was just an audio clip. So what did you hear in that? What worked for you? Did the interviewee's description of how much energy a microwave, or how much time that a microwave would be used to create that same amount of energy, is that something that worked for you? Felt like we were part of the conversation. Yeah, using everyday reference points. Yeah, comparing to how long you're using a microwave. Relatable examples, exactly. They were both talking pretty fast, yeah. Linking AI to running the microwave was very relatable, right? So if she had talked, I don't even know what metrics to use, but if she had talked about, well, this uses, I don't know, this many kilowatts, I mean, that doesn't really mean anything. I don't, know what's a low number of kilowatts or what's a large number of kilowatts, but by comparing it to something that we all use, which is a microwave, using it for microwave for 1/10 of a second or an hour helps you understand that, oh, I never use a microwave for an hour. That must be a lot of energy. So you can see how using those analogies, making relations to everyday things, can really help you get your points across in different ways. All right, I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. All righty. Okay, and so this is a concept that I think this is a really nice framework for thinking about how to prepare for interviews, and which is to build a story house. And within that house, you have kind of an overarching theme. Everything fits under this roof, and under that roof are 3 main messages that you want to internalize and hopefully get across in your interview. So if we think about the Dr. Gounder interview, her kind of main pitch was, lenacapavir is this newly approved drug, and it's an HIV breakthrough. And she explained, you didn't hear the whole interview, but throughout the whole interview, she talks about, three aspects of that. One is why it matters. And I would argue that anytime you're talking to the media, you need to explain why it matters. So, here are the two words I was searching for: convenience and adherence. So simple, relatable words. We can kind of get an idea of what that means right away, why that's important. She then went on to talk specifically about who it helps, and later on in the interview, she talked about accessibility. So, it was clear throughout the interview that she had these points in mind from the get-go. Another thing about, creating this framework is that what it helps you to do is, help you remember, like, okay, these are the three things I need to talk about. These are the three things I need to talk about. These are the three things I need to talk about. And so there are things that you can often come back to, even as questions, further along in the interview. It's okay and actually a good idea to hammer those main points over and over and over again. Maybe you're saying them in slightly different ways, but if you have certain take homes that you want people to carry with them, then there's an advantage to saying it more than once. Now, of course, if this is a recorded interview, then the journalist can edit it however they want. So maybe your messages get in there, maybe it doesn't. But at least if you've said it more than once, then you're increasing the chance that it'll get in there. Um, and uh, hopefully that'll make it into the story. The other point I want to make here is that, even though you're coming up with these three messages, you really want to have one main takeaway. And so, make sure that that main takeaway comes out loud and clear, and is probably, one of the first things that you're going to say. And so it's worth it to, really build this story house for yourself, prepare it, practice it, talk it through with other people to make sure that it makes sense. Another thing I'll say is, you know, th- what if this were a different situation? We're talking about measles, and maybe the main takeaway of the person being interviewed is that if you haven't been vaccinated, you need to go get vaccinated. So you can see how you can customize that framework, to fit that narrative. Go get vaccinated. This is going to be the first thing I say. Why should you get vaccinated? Well, you can get really sick. How sick can you get? Well, some people die. So where do you get the vaccine? Oh, you can go to your Walgreens, or your local. Oh, it's 11:45. Your local pharmacy to get one. So this is going to be your friend if you can construct this framework, really work on it. Then you'll be well prepared for interviews. Okay. And it's worth it, if you have this main takeaway, you can really flag it down, by using those precise words, and preface it by saying, the most important thing to remember is, if you remember nothing else, then remember this. So, like, you can make it obvious to the audience, what it is that you want to say. Okay. Sophia, you're up. So we are going to do a little exercise here. And oops, hang on. And Sophia and I am going to interview Sophia. And I need to find my questions in all this mess. Excuse me, everyone. So I am a reporter in this situation. And Sophia is our expert scientist. And, oh dear. Sorry, everybody. Here we go. And so we're going to do a little role play here. I'm going to ask Sophia a few questions. And we'll start with one question and then we'll go into some others. And I'm going to ask you to pay attention to certain things once we get to that second set of questions. So I'm reporter Julie Kiefer with University of Utah Health Research News. And today we have with us expert vision scientist, Dr. Sophia Friesen from the University of Utah, who has just released results from a groundbreaking study. Good morning, Dr. Friesen. Can you please tell us about your exciting discovery?
Thanks, Julie. So in my lab, we're trying to understand how the brain adapts to changes in visual perspective sensing. This is a critical process that helps us do everything from pick up a pencil to merge onto the freeway. It's also a really flexible process. And in our most recent study, we introduce our unique three-eyed mouse model that lets us measure how brain activity adapts as the literal perspective on the world changes, with the end goal of helping find better therapies for people with vision changes.
Wow, that's incredible. Okay, so I'm going to pull out for a second and say, so all of you watching here, I'm going to ask Dr. Friesen a question, and I'm going to ask it 2 times. And Sophia is going to answer it in 2 different ways. So I want you to listen for what's different and, what are some of the good things about the way they answer those questions and what are some of the things that could be improved. So listen in. Dr. Friesen, could someone use this research to make a 3-eyed person?
Well, Julie, first of all, using the research to make a three-eyed person would be really unethical. But if they did, I expect that that person would be superhumanly good at spatial tasks like juggling and NASCAR driving.
Wow. All right. So we're going to ask that question a second time. Dr. Friesen, does that mean could somebody use this research to make a 3-eyed human?
Well, I can't speak to hypotheticals, but I am really glad you brought up how our work applies to people, because what I think is really important about our results is that they're laying the groundwork for future clinical trials to help folks with vision loss.
Excellent. Okay, so you out there in audience land, what was maybe not so great about that first answer, and what was maybe better about that second one? And you can answer either or. Judge the question. Not exact. Offers opinion and conjecture. Very good. The first one washed their hands of having anything to do with it. Yes. Filler words, looking away, hypothetical, but fun joke. Oh, good. And the second, eye contact tied the question back to the main point, was still able to add humor. Second one was better. Yes. Didn't sound interested or authoritative for that first one. Great. Yes. So I think some of the things I want to point out is that first one, Sophia talked about what would actually happen if you made a 3-eyed person. But really, in situations like this, it's best not to speculate. That's really beside the point that Sophia is trying to make by talking about the research. And so, you don't want them to be distracted by something that may never happen or even pose the possibility that we're going to have 3-eyed humans walking around, because really that's probably not going to happen, I hope. Another thing is Sophia talked about, let's see, how, oh, shoot, now I'm forgetting how did you answer that first one again, Sophia?
Well, first of all, I said, that would be really unethical if someone did that. And I started with a negative, and then I immediately jumped into what would happen.
Right. And so in situations like this, you don't want to repeat a negative statement because what that ends up doing is kind of reinforcing it, which is actually the opposite of what you want to do, right? You want them to be thinking about something else entirely. I think one of the pros is that Sophia addressed the questions very respectfully. I think one of the things that we will talk about in a minute is how they bridged. They took the question and bridge to what they really wanted to say. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. And the other thing is, that this is something actually Sophia brought up, is that, by saying something like, oh, that's a really good question, that gives you time to think while you're, so that you can formulate the question that you want to give. So words like that, those filler words, aren't very informative. They're not informative, in fact, but they buy you a little time and can be helpful in that way. All right, we're going to go through one more question with Sophia, with Dr. Friesen. So here is my question as a reporter. What? You harmed animals in this research? Did they suffer?
Well, I would say that suffering is pretty minimal. We knock them out before we do any invasive procedures, and we euthanize them after any severe modifications. I mean, we're trying to help people here. These are just mice.
All right, let's try that again. What? You harmed animals in this research? Did they suffer?
Thank you for bringing that up. Ethical animal care is actually a really important part of doing good science. So we make sure all of our research is aligned with all of the regulatory guardrails that are in place to ensure animal welfare. And that actually includes working with animals only when doing so is the best way to get meaningful answers for people. Like in cases like this, where we're working on this really complex problem of vision changes.
Very good. So what is your feedback, audience? What did you like or not like about those answers? Or what was done well and not done well? Good justification on the second one, yes. First one, reinforced person's concern for animals. And it's okay to have concern, but what we don't want to hear is get this visualization of, how these mice might be suffering, whether they are or not. Severe modifications, I have the right, if I have that right, is a scary phrase. Yeah, you don't want to be reinforcing these kind of negative points of view. The second one showed concern for the animals. Yes. I think some other things to note were in that first one, Sophia mentioned that they were just mice. So, kind of dismissing the reporter's concerns, that's not something you want to do. You want to be respectful, but then steer them in the right direction, as they did with the second one. I like the second one with the additional justification saying the positive things they did to be safe as possible and not getting into a tricky discussion about what people define as harm. Yes, very good. You want to, in situations like that, you want to meet the person where they are, acknowledge their concern, but then, steer them in the direction that you want to go. This is, something that we take very seriously. Here's how we address those concerns. And what I really want you to remember is that, our ultimate goal is to help people, and this is how we're doing it. All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Friesen. We are going to wrap up with a few more slides. I think, hang on. All right, there it is. Okay. Yeah, go, oops. Do you see it? Yes. Okay. So in addition to things that we've talked about before, never repeat a negative statement. Don't feel like you have to fill in the silence. Don't talk just for the sake of talking. Speak slowly so that people can hear you. They understand what you're saying. Also prepare for the unexpected. So we talked about building those story house, but it's also worth thinking about, some of these curveballs that could come up. Is your topic related to a controversial issue? If so, then you should be prepared to talk about that. Build a bridge to your story house. We'll talk about that in the next slide. And I think most of all, remember that you're the expert. Have confidence in yourself. Like they're talking to you for a reason. And so you can be confident in your own expertise, and, just, your instincts matter. And so, go that with them in a respectful way. And so, this skill of bridging to what you want to say is a really important thing to master, because at some point you will be given a question that you're not expecting. And it's okay not to answer their question, and, think through, like, what do they really want to know, or what is something related that I want them to know? And so you acknowledge their question, but then bridge to what you really want to say. That's not my area of expertise, but what I can tell you is, here's one of my messages from the story house. I appreciate you bringing that up, but here's what the key issue is. Here's my key message from my story house, and so on. So this is a really important skill to work that's going to get you a long way through getting through these interviews. And I'll just end by saying, I think things that you can think through, on your own time and practice is, what would be your goal in talking to the media? If you had one single goal that you wanted to accomplish, what would that be? Build that story house, anticipate those curveball questions, and practice, practice, practice. Learn about science communication skills, put those into play, with friends, with coworkers, family members, or even by doing media interviews. These things are it's easy to say to understand what you think you should do during an interview, but when you actually have to do it, of course, it's a whole different ball game. So practice makes all the difference. And so I hope that these have been helpful tools for you. And we have 2 minutes for any remaining questions. All righty. Yes, Jane? You can go
So
ahead.
if I can get off mute, that would be great. I know that a lot of times, even with all of this planning and preparation, the media will sometimes put a spin on things a little bit. How do you go about reconciling statements that might not be quite what you intended to come across?
Yeah, and do you mean once the story is published? That's
Right.
not quite what, yeah. Um, and that's tricky. And I think that's what scares a lot of people from the media, right? That they're gonna kind of twist their message into something you didn't intend. I think one answer is not going to be very satisfying, but I think it is good to keep in mind, which is that the news cycle is very fast. People forget things quickly. And so something that you think is horrible and on your mind will probably be in the public eye for a day or two, and then will be forgotten. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, that these things are very transient. If there is facts that they got wrong, then I would then go back to the reporter and tell them the facts that they got wrong. And they should, if it's something that you can show, look, this specific thing should read this way, they should correct that, because they want to be factually correct. If it's the spin that they got wrong, I think it depends, besides just wishing it to go away. There are countermeasures you could take, on social media, clarifying in that way. If it's really serious, you can involve your press office to, potentially issue a statement or something along those lines. But I think countering, say, misinformation or not quite the message you wanted to get out with good information, is probably the most practical way to do it, either through social media or working with your own public affairs team to maybe issue their own story, their own blog, or communicate that in some other way.